You mentioned stopping talking. Is there any difference to you between prayer and meditation? Because for many people, prayer involves talking, right?
Well, the one leads into the other. But prayer is usually taken to mean, yes, a dialogue between you and God. But but especially if you're talking to someone you love, you often come to a point where you stop talking and you just look at each other and love each other. And you run out of words to say. Well, that happens in prayer, doesn't it? If you could pray for long enough and just melt into the presence. Yes, I don't like to make too much of a distinction between the two. For me, one's pretty much the same, really, in their maturity, put it that way. In the beginnings, yes, of course, there's a difference. And the church was, when I learned to meditate, the church was very anti-meditation, sort of something Eastern and not quite Christian. Oh dear, yes, we get very hung up on details, don't we, and miss the point.
Yeah, it does seem that there has been a Christian mystic tradition the whole way along, but it's not been the one that's been taught to most of us in school.
No, it hasn't. No, indeed. Well, school or education tends to consist of words, doesn't it?
That's a great point.
Perhaps you see, one of the features of this silence is not knowing, isn't it? Because the moment you know something, what happens? You put it in a little box, don't you? And you divide it into what I know and what I don't know. And the different things that you know. So knowing is actually a very mixed blessing. It's much better to not know. Now, the real wisdom is not knowing. You see, the wisdom of man, in other words, human knowledge, is foolishness to God. And so it is. Come into the unspoken language of the heart, and it all begins to make sense, doesn't it? Human knowledge, foolishness to God. Now you got to, you know, if you're serious about this work, it's not easy because you've got to let go a lot of very deeply beloved things that we hold on to very tightly, including everything to do with me, I, me, and mine, which is separate from you and yours. All that's got to go. And it takes great courage to be broken and humbled and to lose all this, lose what we call my existence, my validity in this world, my reality. To realize it's nothing but a pack of cards. It all crumbles away like death, the great teacher shows us. But when we're young, we don't believe it, do we? It's all too real. So I think we can't grow old before our time. I'm sure we're given 80 odd years in this life because it takes us that long to learn anything, really. Yes. Yes, it's not a game for the faint-hearted. This, if you're serious about spirit, you've got to fight the good fight. And the first bubble to be pricked is our own self-righteous pride.
I've heard you say in other talks that you're not a fan of compulsion, of people being told they have to do this or that. Is that something as well you see as a split between maybe some of the traditional ways Christianity is taught versus a kind of Christian mysticism?
Well, I was brought up on compulsion, James. I had no choice about going to church at school. The army was all discipline. I've had plenty of discipline in my life. I think at certain times of life it's a good thing. I think it's very good. Yes, I don't regret that I was compelled to do things I wouldn't have done otherwise. I'm glad I was. I was taught good manners, taught to behave in a certain way. I'm very disciplined in my own practice of meditation. I've practiced twice a day, believe it or not, for 60 years. Hardly ever missed it. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we're given the commandments in the Bible, aren't we? The Bible's full of instruction, judge not. If we were told not to judge and obeyed, we might all be happier. But now everybody's left to decide for themselves, which I'm not sure is a better way. You're in education, dear. I'm not. You try to train a dog with discipline, don't you? Tell it not to do this, not to do that. Well, we're not much different to puppies, are we? Most of us.
Do you find that some people in your audience struggle with the Christian framing around these teachings?
Oh, yes, they do. Yes, I'm afraid they do. Well, I'm not sure that one can really do very much to. People have to work out in their own way, in their own time, don't they? These things. I'm not sure that telling people, especially mature people, is very effective. Teaching by example is probably better, isn't it? Often the silence is best, isn't it? Can't remember when I last had an argument. I just don't get into it these days. Somebody takes another view, well, God bless them. I don't mind.
You mentioned earlier that you initially turned to kind of more Eastern religions. How old were you? Like, when was the process of coming back to Christianity for you?
It must have been my early 20s. Yes, I did read fairly widely among the sort of classical books of religion then. I started to meditate when I was 26. Yes, throughout my 20s I was fairly sort of well read in spiritual things. But I never abandoned Christianity. I always have the soft spot for the church. I used to like to go into churches, usually when it was empty. I always preferred it like that. And always liked to meditate in churches. But, I never met anybody in the church that I really wanted to follow. I never met a priest that I really particularly respected for what he could teach me. I always felt nature was my first teacher, really. And I suppose I was in my early 20s when I first started farming. Very soon, I remember my first experience of walking as a farmer, or not my first experience, but walking across a field of grass and realized how my feet bruised the grass, hurt the grass. I couldn't really do anything without hurting something. Well, I was both the creator but also the destroyer of my farm, sending my lovely lambs that I loved so much to market. What else could I do? And then I began to realize that, you see, just as Jesus is sacrificed for our sins, that we might live, so is the grass, so are the lambs, so isn't the grass Jesus? So just as we, by our absence from God, bring death into the world, so the world is sacrificed for us. So the grass is bruised and the lambs are killed. Why? Because I have left God where I don't need to eat lambs or bruise the grass. I'd be like a fairy, wouldn't I, dancing over the grass. I wouldn't do it any harm. The spirit. My great big clumsy boots hurt the grass. Why? Because I've fallen from my truest state of spirit into this mortality, which brings everything else down with it. And the wages of sin is death, and then death not only for me but for the lambs. So you see, Christianity for me, as I said, it really quite early on in my experience greatly expanded. In a way, I felt much, because you're a farmer, I felt much more comfortable with Jesus as a lamb than I did as a person, really. And in a way, that took the heat out of the situation. And thereafter, whether people think I'm nuts or not, I don't mind. And that can be happy. Now I can broadcast it far and wide, and people can think I'm mad, or they can think, well, maybe he's right. I don't mind one way or the other. Well, I did suffer very much, you see, this whole ecological business that's so prevalent now. See, I took that on board as a very, very young man. I was still a boy, really, when I really started worrying about the fate of animals and nature. And it's been a great comfort to me to realize that to see it all in a more spiritual context now, you see. And that the cause of all this trouble is me as a separate individual, you see. The me that has fallen from my pure spiritual estate, where there is no death, neither for me or for the animals or anything else, whatever else may be there. There's no appetite, there's no need to eat. It's me that has that has fallen from the presence of God down into this mortality. So it's basically all my fault. It's no good blaming anybody else, because the buck stops here. It's me. Now, never mind if there are millions of other me's in the world. It's my responsibility. Now, once I began to take that on board, then I realized that the best thing I can do, not only for myself, but for the world, is to rediscover this world of spirit, is to raise the consciousness, not only of myself, because like when you lift up a blanket, you raise everything. And it's this raising of consciousness that is the true work. This is the work of prayer. This is what it's all about. To begin with, we want spirituality from me, of course we do. But gradually you begin to realize its universal relevance. You see, this is what redemption's all about. This is the real true work. Save yourself and you come back. One of the key things, sorry, I'm gabbling on now, stop me if you want. As a young man in South America, where I went to make the world a better place, I was sitting on a mountain once on top of the Andes, and a little voice said, to make whole, be whole. And that's been with me all my life. And I've been trying to understand what it was. And I've been, like all these good things, it just goes on. You understand a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And now I see it really is real. It's true. Come back to wholeness, which is the oneness, you see. And what is not included, everything is. And this is why, although, you look at me now, a little frail old man that hardly exists now in this world, but you see, in spirit, it is infinite. This is the real one. That's why God is called Almighty, because it is. You merge into the Almighty, and never mind the body can just fall away. It's done its work, it's finished. You begin to be a spiritual man. But you don't become anything, because your individuality, the John Butler, is just forgotten and fades out. It just merges into the infinite. Thy will, not mine. Thy will be done. That's the glory of it. Yeah, that's glory. From glory to glory. That's what it's all about.
And while this can be framed in a Christian sense, do you think this is the same insight that's at the core of all the world's religions?
Oh, I don't know. I couldn't tell you today, but It's real, isn't it? It's true. I think it is. I think wise men have always known this. Well, maybe they haven't. I don't know. How do I know?